There is land for sale in Texas right now. Legal, deeded, transferable land, going for less than a used lawnmower. Some of it sits on county websites with no takers. Some of it gets auctioned off on courthouse steps for a few $100s with nobody in the room bidding. And in a handful of forgotten corners of the state, you can walk into a county clerk's office, hand over $1,500, and walk out owning acres of Texas soil that the previous owner simply stopped paying taxes on. That sounds impossible. And in most of the country, it would be. But Texas has two real estate markets running at the same time. There's the one you've heard about, Austin, Dallas, Houston, where a starter home goes for $400,000 and bidding wars still happen on weekends. And then there's the other Texas, the one where desert acreage lists for $300 per acre, where timber companies are practically begging someone to take their forested land off their hands, where a whole subdivision exists with paved streets and utility hookup posts and almost no houses on it. In this video, we're going through 10 specific Texas towns where land is so cheap it seems like a glitch. For each one, we'll break down exactly why the price is what it is, the water crises, the legal traps, the industrial disasters next door, the regulatory dead ends, and whether any of them are actually worth a second look if you want to own a piece of land without bankrupting yourself first. Some of these are genuine opportunities for the right buyer. Some of them are expensive mistakes dressed up as bargains. Here's what each one actually is. Texas is practically giving away land in these 10 towns. Here's why. Terlingua. In the far southwest corner of Texas, pushed up against the Rio Grande and the Chihuahuan Desert, sits a community called Terlingua. Surrounding it is a massive land development called Terlingua Ranch, roughly 190,000 acres divided into about 9,500 individual parcels owned by more than 5,000 deed holders scattered across the country. You can buy an acre here for under $1,000, sometimes well under. The landscape looks like the surface of Mars, which is either the appeal or the problem depending on who you ask. Big Bend National Park is right there. The night sky is extraordinary. Off-grid retirees and desert enthusiasts have been quietly purchasing parcels out here for decades, drawn by the price, the space, and the quiet. The part that changes the math is water. There is almost none. The desert receives minimal rainfall, and the aquifer underneath, the Santa Elena, is so geologically complex that state hydrologists haven't been able to fully map it or determine how much water it can sustainably yield. If you want to drill a well on your parcel, you're looking at roughly $45 per linear foot through fractured limestone to depths that commonly run between 600 and 1,000 feet. A single residential well can cost upwards of $30,000, with no guarantee it hits anything drinkable. The Property Owners Association that manages Terlingua Ranch does operate 5 wells. Members get 25 gallons of potable water per week, free of charge. Additional water beyond that runs $0.25 per gallon, which you haul yourself in your own containers over unpaved roads that aren't kind to vehicles. Non-potable utility water for things like irrigation or livestock runs 10 cents per gallon, capped at 1,000 gallons a month. Do the math on a household that actually needs water, and the hauling costs, fuel costs, and vehicle wear add up to a real recurring expense on top of the land's carrying costs. And then the Brewster County Appraisal District noticed the glamping boom, the dome rentals, the teepee stays, the boutique desert tourism spreading across these parcels. Properties assessed at a static $13,200 for years suddenly got reappraised at $52,800 in a single cycle, 4 times the previous value overnight. Annual carrying costs jumped accordingly. Landowners who bought as a long-term hold started listing, and the land stayed cheap because the people who understood what owning it actually required kept walking away. Sierra Blanca. Hudspeth County sits just east of El Paso, as far west as Texas gets. The land here is flat, dry, and enormous, and a company called Sunset Ranches controls roughly 250,000 acres of it. For decades, Sunset Ranches marketed 20-acre parcels to buyers across the country using terms like $99 down and $99 a month. An affordable piece of the Texas frontier, your own land, real ownership for the price of a car payment. The parcels are legitimately cheap, between $300 $300 and $1,000 per acre. The reason Sunset Ranches can price land that low while providing absolutely none of the infrastructure a person needs to live on it comes down to a single paragraph in the Texas Local Government Code. Texas has what's called the Anti-Colonia Law. It was built to prevent developers from creating unincorporated border communities, colonias, without electricity, water, or paved roads. The law requires any developer selling residential lots under 5 acres to install full utility infrastructure before the first sale. Water lines, sewer, power. Sunset Ranches sells 20-acre tracts, just large enough to sit above that 5-acre threshold, which means the anti-colonia law does not apply. No utilities required, no roads required, nothing. The developer transfers the deed, the buyer gets the land. The buyer is now solely responsible for getting power, water, and sewage to a remote desert parcel where the water table is deep, the groundwater is often too saline to drink, and extending the electrical grid can run $10,000 per utility pole. When buyers can't make it work and default on their seller finance contracts, the land goes back to Sunset Ranches, which then resells it. Same parcel, same pitch, different name on the paperwork. The buyer who defaulted loses every payment they made. There's no equity, no refund, no recourse. The company resets the contract terms and starts the cycle again. This isn't an occasional outcome. High default rates are structural to the business model. The land's cheapness and the financing's accessibility attract buyers who by definition have limited financial cushion. When the infrastructure reality sets in, many can't absorb it, and the developer doesn't need them to. The land stays cheap because the infrastructure gap never closes, and the gap never closes because the law doesn't require it to. Toya. Most of the cheap land in this video is cheap because of what it lacks. Toya is different. Toya is cheap because of what's sitting right next to it. Toya is in Reeves County, inside the Permian Basin, the most productive oil-producing region in the United States. The Permian has made extraordinary amounts of money for a lot of people, but extracting that oil creates a byproduct the industry doesn't advertise: toxic hypersaline wastewater that comes up with the crude, carrying heavy metals, chemical additives, and naturally occurring radioactive materials. For every barrel of oil the Permian produces, the process generates more than 3 barrels of that wastewater. The standard disposal method is injecting it back underground into deep disposal wells at enormous volumes and pressure, and that pressure has to go somewhere. In October of 2024, an orphaned well west of Toya, drilled in 1961 and long since abandoned, blew out. Overpressurized subsurface fluid found a path through that old well bore and created a 100-foot geyser of saltwater, oil, and hydrogen sulfide gas. Hydrogen sulfide is lethal at high concentrations. This geyser was registering over 200 parts per million. It erupted continuously for 19 days before crews could contain it, contaminating local soils and threatening shallow aquifers. In the same period, Toya experienced 5 earthquakes within a single 24-hour window, magnitudes ranging from 2.5 to 3.8, caused by the same subsurface pressure destabilizing local fault lines. Separately from all of that, the city's own municipal water system has been degrading for years. Aging pipes, chronic breaks, boil water notices as a recurring feature rather than an emergency. For a retiree thinking about a modest property in Toya, that last detail matters more than it might seem, because it means the one basic alternative to drilling your own well, relying on the municipal supply, is itself unreliable. You'd be depending on a failing system in a town sitting on top of an industrial overpressure zone that already proved in 2024 that it can blow without warning. The land around Toya is cheap because the ground itself has become an industrial liability, not a metaphor, a documented, ongoing, measurable one. And that's nothing compared to what's happening with property titles in the next county over. Ivano. East Texas looks nothing like the desert. Tyler County is dense forest, high humidity, green in a way that feels almost aggressive after the Trans-Pecos. And Ivanhoe, a small community here, offers some of the cheapest subdivided residential lots in the state. Parcels around 1/5 of an acre going for nominal sums, with annual property taxes under $100 and homeowners association dues as low as $6 a year. $6 a year. The lot exists, the deed is real, and the problem doesn't show up on any listing. Texas environmental law, enforced by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, requires that any septic system maintain minimum setback distances from everything around it. Private water wells need 50 feet of clearance. Property boundaries need 5 feet. The foundation elevation of the house itself needs 10 feet. Surface water gets 50 to 100 feet depending on classification. On a standard Ivanhoe lot, roughly 8,500 square feet. Once you draw the house footprint and apply each required setback, the remaining area available for a septic drain field is often too small to meet code. The geometry simply doesn't work. The only legal path forward in that scenario is an aerobic treatment unit, a more sophisticated septic system engineered to function in tight spaces. But an aerobic system costs between $10,000 and $20,000 to install, compared to around $6,500 for a conventional one. The state also mandates ongoing service contracts with licensed providers, requiring professional inspections every 4 months, indefinitely. Add the electricity cost of running the aerator pump around the clock, and the annual operating expense runs between $650 and $800 every year. A lot purchased for $3,000 carries a legally mandated utility liability, and in present value terms across a 10-year hold, of over $20,000. The lot is cheap, the cost of legally using the lot is not. Plum Grove. Liberty County is northeast of Houston, close enough to the metro that cheap land in this neighborhood should immediately raise questions. Plum Grove is a small city sitting adjacent to Colony Ridge, a development that sprawled across nearly 20,000 acres over the past decade, housing tens of thousands of residents drawn by low lot prices and highly accessible seller financing. No credit check, no income verification, minimal down payments. The marketing described these lots as move-in ready with access to city services. In practice, buyers waited months or years for utility connections after signing their contracts. During that window, they couldn't legally occupy their lots, and the land itself was poorly engineered from the start. Developers cleared massive tracts, filled in natural wetlands, and built drainage ditches that didn't meet standard civil engineering requirements for stormwater detention. Heavy rains regularly flooded properties and sent downstream sediment into the East Fork of the San Jacinto River, triggering costly public dredging funded by taxpayers who didn't live anywhere near the development. The foreclosure rate at Colony Ridge ran at roughly 12%, approximately 50 times the national average. Each foreclosure meant the developer reclaimed the lot, kept every prior payment, and put the parcel back on the market for the next buyer. In February of 2026, the Department of Justice, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and the state of Texas finalized a $68 million settlement with the developer. $18 million went toward drainage infrastructure, $30 million toward roads, wastewater lines, and municipal sewer construction, $20 million toward law enforcement to bring the development up to basic safety standards. The developer is now barred from filing new residential plats for 3 years. Land around Plum Grove remains cheap because the regulatory constraints are real. The infrastructure is still being built, and the market has absorbed what this development's actual business model was. Dryden. Terrell County has one of the lowest population densities in the continental United States. Dryden, the county's main settlement, sits in the canyonlands of the Trans-Pecos, steep limestone terrain, shallow rocky soil, and desert scrub extending for miles in every direction without a town, a store, or a paved crossroads. Large tracts here, ranging from 60 to over 180 acres, regularly list for $600 to $900 per acre, which sounds reasonable until you start pricing what it costs to exist on one of them. The terrain can't be farmed, the soil is too thin, the rock too close to the surface, and the landscape too broken for any meaningful cultivation. The practical use case is light livestock grazing or recreational hunting, lower value operations that don't justify significant capital investment. For someone who wants to build an off-grid homestead, the costs stack quickly. There is no municipal water. Drilling through hard limestone requires specialized rotary equipment that drives well costs above the already high regional baseline. Grid power isn't close enough to extend economically, and the nearest paved state highway may be miles from any given parcel, connected only by unpaved easement roads shared among neighboring landowners. During wet seasons, those roads erode badly. Restoring them after washouts requires graders and bulldozers and coordination among property owners who may not agree on timing or cost sharing. There's no county maintenance obligation on private easement roads. If your neighbor decides the road isn't their priority that month and you're on the far end of it, you're stuck. That kind of collective action problem, where everyone's access depends on everyone else's cooperation, is invisible from a listing page and very visible once you're trying to get to your property after 3 days of rain. Living living on land in Dryden means funding your own water system, your own power generation, and your own road maintenance in terrain that resists all three. The price is accurate. The canyons are genuinely beautiful. They are also genuinely inhospitable to anything resembling conventional habitation, but wait until you hear what happens to buyers in Van Horn who thought they owned their land outright. Van Horn. Culberson County is west of the Pecos River, deep in the Chihuahuan Desert. Van Horn is the county seat, and the surrounding area offers a range of cheap acreage. Small 20-acre parcels for around $1,100 an acre, and large legacy ranches averaging under $500 per acre across thousands of acres. The desert landscape here carries a particular problem that doesn't show up in any listing description. In much of West Texas, the mineral rights to a property were legally separated from the surface rights decades ago, sometimes a century ago, and under Texas law, the mineral estate is dominant. If you buy a 20-acre parcel near Van Horn, and the mineral rights were severed before your deed was ever written, you own the surface, the dirt, the scrub brush, whatever structures you build. A third party, often an energy company, owns everything below it, and that third party holds an implied legal easement to enter your property, drill through it, and run infrastructure across it without your permission. Their only legal obligation is to operate with reasonable care. That is essentially the full extent of what they owe you. A retirement homestead in Culberson County can legally become an active drill pad or pipeline corridor. This is not a theoretical risk in West Texas. It is a documented legal reality. Beyond that, water here typically sits at depths exceeding 800 feet, and when you reach it, the mineral content is often too high for drinking without expensive reverse osmosis filtration equipment, and many of these cheap parcels are landlocked. No frontage on any public road. Getting legal access means negotiating a private easement with adjacent landowners, a process that can drag into expensive litigation and erase whatever the low purchase price appeared to save. Burkeville. Newton County is as far east as Texas gets. Thick pine forest along the Sabine River, close to the Louisiana border, lush and green in a way that feels like a completely different state than Van Horn. Toledo Bend Reservoir sits nearby. Rainfall is high, the trees are dense, and large tracts of timberland here are being offloaded by paper companies and institutional timber management organizations at prices well below what you'd expect for forested land with water access. The reason institutional sellers are letting go of this land is the same reason buyers should ask hard questions before taking it. A significant portion of Newton County's acreage sits inside FEMA Flood Zone A, the 100-year floodplain classification. That designation carries legal consequences that compound fast. Any habitable structure built within Flood Zone A must have its lowest finished floor elevated at least 1 foot above the base flood elevation. No slab-on-grade construction. You're looking at pier and beam foundations or concrete columns, a meaningful cost premium over standard residential building methods. Standard gravity-fed septic systems are also prohibited in high water table soils, which describes most buildable land in Newton County's floodplain areas. Landowners must commission professional engineering designs for mound or drip systems, more expensive, more complex, and more maintenance intensive than anything a standard permit covers. And if the forested tract contains designated wetlands, which many of these timber offloads do, clearing vegetation, building an access road, or depositing fill material requires a permit from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. That process can take years and may require ecological mitigation that costs more than the land itself. The paper companies selling these tracts aren't doing it because they've stumbled onto something wonderful. They're offloading a regulatory burden to buyers who haven't calculated it yet. Patica. The rolling plains of north central Texas look productive. Fields stretch to the horizon. Cattle move across pastures. Paducah, the county seat of Cottle County, sits at the center of a region that has been agricultural for over a century. Large farming and ranching tracts here regularly list for under $1,500 an acre, a meaningful discount from comparable agricultural land elsewhere in Texas. That discount traces directly to what's happening underground. The rolling plains have historically relied on the Ogallala Aquifer for crop irrigation. irrigation. That aquifer is being depleted faster than it recharges, a problem documented for decades and now reaching a threshold that water planners can no longer soften. State projections show a 32% decline in available groundwater across this region by 2070. Groundwater conservation districts have responded with mandatory pumping limits, well metering requirements, and bans on new agricultural irrigation permits. These aren't proposals, they're active regulations already in effect. As irrigation becomes legally constrained, producers around Paducah are shifting to dryland farming. Crops grown without irrigation on rainfall alone, or to light livestock grazing. Both are lower yield operations on the same acreage. Lower yields produce lower income. Lower income supports lower land values. Institutional landowners who understand where this trajectory ends are selling now, while the land still looks productive enough to justify a decent asking price. The land still looks like a working farm because in the short term, it still functions like one. The water that made it worth farming at scale is being rationed away, and the people selling it understand that better than the people buying it. Matador. Matador sits about 40 miles south of Paducah in Motley County, and from the road, it looks identical to the land around Paducah. Flat, wide, agricultural, the same sky, the same pastures, the same aquifer problem, and a different consequence. Where Paducah's story is about the water disappearing, Matador's story is about what land does when the water is already gone in practical terms, when the irrigation permits have dried up, when the transition away from row crop farming is no longer a future risk but a present reality. What happens is this: the land's economic identity shifts. Motley County acreage that was once valued for its irrigation capacity is now being repositioned for recreational uses. Hunting leases, wildlife management, low-intensity grazing, uses that generate far less income per acre than irrigated agriculture. That repositioning takes time, and it takes capital. Transitioning fields to native grassland or brush habitat attractive to white-tailed deer or quail doesn't happen overnight. Establishing the kind of wildlife population that supports a profitable hunting lease typically takes several years of managed land stewardship, when controlled burns, water feature improvements, supplemental feeding programs, fencing. None of that is free. Landowners who don't want to fund that transition period or who can't absorb the interim carrying cost while income from the land drops are liquidating now, which is why large tracts in Motley County are moving at prices well under $1,500 per acre in a state where agricultural land in better watered counties commands multiples of that. The buyers who can absorb the transition costs and think in decades rather than years may find something real here. The buyers who assume they're getting productive farmland at a discount are looking at the wrong asset. The land is cheap because the use case it was built around no longer works the way it used to, and finding a new use case is the buyer's problem, not the seller's. Across all 10 of these towns, the pattern holds. The price is accurate, not in the sense that the land is worthless. Some of these parcels make real sense for the right buyer with the right resources and realistic expectations, but the market has already done the analysis. The discount in Terlingua reflects $30,000 in well drilling risk. The discount in Burkeville reflects pier and beam construction costs and Army Corps permitting timelines. The Sierra Blanca price reflects every dollar of solar infrastructure and water hauling that the developer was never legally required to provide. The sellers who understand these properties best are often the ones walking away from them. The paper companies, the institutional landowners, the developers with legal teams who have read every regulation and decided the liability belongs to someone else now. The cheapness is frequently a function of informed sellers transferring a known cost to buyers who haven't priced it yet. That's not fraud in most of these cases. It's just information asymmetry, and it runs in one direction. That doesn't mean these towns are off the table. It means the real work happens before you sign anything. Running the true cost of habitation against the listing price, the wells, the foundations, the permits, the road maintenance, the title work is not a bureaucratic chore. It's the actual investment decision. The listing price is just the entry fee to a much longer calculation. The land is out there. Texas really is selling it cheap. The question every buyer should be asking is why? And the answer is almost always already written into the price.